The stars had always called to Danny Carter. Ever since he was a small boy growing up in a tiny town in Kansas, he would lie on the grass behind his house and stare up at the night sky. He would wonder what was out there beyond the clouds, beyond the moon, beyond everything he knew. Now, at 32 years old, he finally had his answer, and it was terrifying. Danny stood at the observation window of Meridian 7, a deep space outpost floating at the very edge of human territory. He had been stationed here for 3 long years. 3 years of routine work, boring meals, and endless silence. The outpost was home to only 47 people, and most days nothing happened at all. They monitored signals, maintained equipment, and waited for something that might never come. But today was different. Today, everything changed. The ship had appeared 2 hours ago. It came out of nowhere, dropping out of faster-than-light travel like a giant crystal emerging from the darkness. The vessel was enormous, at least 10 times the size of any human ship ever built. It hung in the black void of space like a frozen tear, its surface catching the light of distant stars and throwing it back in 1,000 colors. Danny had never seen anything so beautiful. He had also never seen anything so frightening. "Lieutenant Carter," a voice said behind him. He turned to see Commander walking toward him. She was a tall woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too much. "They've made contact. They want to send a delegation." Danny felt his heart beat faster. You mean?" "Aliens, Danny. Real, actual aliens." Commander's voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "They call themselves and they want to talk." Within the hour, the outpost was in chaos. People ran through the corridors, shouting orders and checking systems. Danny helped where he could, but his mind kept drifting back to that massive ship hanging outside. What did they want? Were they friendly? Were they dangerous? The answers came quickly, and they were not good. They sent a message explaining who they were. They were a conquering species, rulers of over 200 star systems. They had been expanding their empire for thousands of years, bringing other races under their control. Some species served them as workers, others as soldiers. A few had been wiped out entirely when they refused to submit. Now they had found humanity, and they wanted to negotiate. "Negotiate," Commander said with a bitter laugh during the emergency meeting. "That's a nice word for surrender." They had made their demands clear. Humanity would become part of their empire. Humans would serve interests. In exchange, they would be allowed to live. It was not a fair deal, but they did not care about fairness. They cared about power. "They want to meet with one of us," continued. "Face to face on their ship. They want to discuss the terms." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. Whoever went to that ship might never come back. They could kill them, capture them, or do something even worse. It was a death sentence wrapped in the language of diplomacy. Danny raised his hand. "I'll go." Everyone stared at him. Lieutenant Jake, his best friend on the station, grabbed his arm. "Danny, are you crazy? You can't go up there. We don't know anything about these creatures." "That's exactly why I should go," Danny said. He pulled his arm free gently and looked around the room. "Someone has to, and I'd rather it be me than someone with a family waiting back home." It was true. Danny had no wife, no children, no one who would miss him too badly if things went wrong. His parents had passed away years ago. His sister lived on Mars and they barely talked anymore. He was, in many ways, alone in the universe. Maybe that was why the stars had always called to him. Maybe he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. 2 hours later, Danny sat in a small shuttle as it carried him toward the ship. His hands were sweating inside his gloves, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The crystal vessel grew larger and larger in the window until it filled his entire view. A door opened in the side of the ship, revealing a passage of soft blue light. Danny's shuttle was pulled inside by some invisible force, and then he was surrounded by alien walls, alien air, alien everything. The shuttle landed with a gentle bump. Danny took a deep breath, said a small prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and opened the door. They were waiting for him. They were tall, much taller than humans. They stood at least 7 feet high, their bodies covered in sleek armor that seemed to be made of the same crystal as their ship. Their faces were hidden behind smooth helmets that revealed nothing. They stood in perfect rows, silent and still, like statues carved from ice. One of them stepped forward. His armor was darker than the others, marked with symbols that might have been writing or might have been decoration. When he spoke, his voice was deep and cold. "I am Lord, commander of this vessel and servant of the Empire. You are the human representative." Danny nodded. His throat was dry, but he forced himself to speak. "I'm Lieutenant Danny Carter. I'm here to talk." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Talk, yes. Humans are good at talking, we have heard. You talk and talk and talk, but in the end you are weak. Your ships are small. Your weapons are primitive. Your empire, if you can call it that, is barely a speck in the galaxy." Danny felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would not help. He needed to stay calm, stay smart. "We may be small," he said carefully, "but we've survived a lot. Wars, plagues, disasters, we're still here." Waved a hand dismissively. "Survival is not the same as strength. You have survived because no one bothered to destroy you. That changes today." Danny was led through the ship, surrounded by guards on all sides. The corridors were beautiful in a cold, empty way. Everything was smooth and perfect, without a single flaw or mark. It felt less like a ship and more like a tomb. Finally, they reached a large chamber. More waited there, standing in a circle around a central platform. Danny was pushed to the middle, alone, surrounded by enemies. But as he looked around the room, his eyes caught something unexpected. One of them was different from the others. Smaller, standing near the back, away from the group. And while every other stood perfectly still, this one moved slightly, shifting from foot to foot. And Danny could have sworn they were looking directly at him. The chamber was cold. Danny could feel it seeping through his uniform, settling into his bones. They stood around him like a forest of frozen trees, their helmeted faces turned toward him with what he could only imagine was contempt. He was an insect to them, a small, meaningless creature that had wandered into the presence of gods. Lord stood on a raised platform at the front of the room. Behind him, a massive window showed the stars outside, and in the distance, Danny could see the tiny shape of Meridian 7, his home, his people, everything he was trying to protect. "Let us begin," said. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across an empty plain. "Human, you have been brought here to hear our terms. The Empire does not negotiate. We do not bargain. We offer you a choice and you will accept it." Danny stood straight, keeping his shoulders back and his chin up. He was terrified, but he would not show it. He could not show it. "I'm listening." Began to speak about the Empire. He talked about the hundreds of worlds they controlled, the trillions of beings who served under their rule. He described their military might, their advanced technology, their complete and total dominance over this region of the galaxy. His voice was proud and cold, like a man describing a collection of objects rather than a civilization of living beings. "Humanity will join our empire," declared. "Your people will serve us. Your resources will become our resources. Your worlds will become our worlds. In exchange, we will allow you to continue existing. This is generous. Many species were not offered such kindness." Danny felt sick. He thought about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests he had seen in pictures as a child. He thought about the colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, full of people living their lives, raising their families, dreaming their dreams. All of it would be taken away. All of it would belong to these cold, heartless creatures. But he could not give up, not yet. "You talk about strength," Danny said, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart. "You talk about power and conquest and dominance, but there's more to strength than weapons and armies. Tilted his head slightly. Explain. Danny took a breath. Humans have been through a lot. We've fought wars against each other that killed millions. We've faced diseases that nearly wiped us out. We've destroyed parts of our own planet and then worked to rebuild them. Every time we faced something terrible, we came back stronger. Not because we had the biggest weapons or the most soldiers, but because we never gave up. He looked around the room, meeting the blank helmets of the one by one. We're dreamers. We're artists. We're lovers and fighters and explorers. We cry when we're sad and laugh when we're happy. We write songs about heartbreak and paint pictures of sunsets. We tell stories to our children about heroes who stand up against impossible odds. Danny's voice grew stronger. You might conquer our worlds, you might take our resources, but you will never take our spirit, because that's something you can't understand. That's something you don't have. The chamber was silent. They stood motionless, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound that filled the room like poison. Spirit, he said, spitting the word out like it was dirty. Emotion, feeling, these are the things you think make you strong. He stepped down from his platform, moving toward Danny with slow, deliberate steps. These are the things that make you weak. Emotion clouds judgment. Feeling leads to hesitation. Love, hope, joy, these are chains that bind you to failure. He stopped directly in front of Danny, towering over him by more than a foot. The Empire became great because we removed these weaknesses. We do not feel. We do not dream. We simply act with perfect logic and perfect purpose. That is why we rule. That is why you will serve. Danny stared up at him, refusing to look away. If you don't feel anything, then what's the point? What's the point of conquering the galaxy if you can't enjoy it? What's the point of living if you can't love? Raised a hand as if to strike him, but before he could move, something unexpected happened. A voice rang out across the chamber. Stop. Everyone turned. The small figure Danny had noticed earlier stepped forward, pushing past the larger. The guards moved to block them, but the figure raised a hand and they stopped immediately. Princess, said, his voice suddenly careful, this is not your concern. Return to your place. No, the figure reached up and did something Danny never expected. They removed their helmet. Danny's breath caught in his throat. His heart seemed to stop beating for a moment, and the world around him faded away until there was only her. She was alien, yes. Her skin was silver, smooth and luminous like moonlight given form. Her hair was white as fresh snow, drifting slightly even though there was no wind, as if it had a life of its own. But it was her eyes that captured him completely. They were large and deep, swirling with colors he had no names for, violet and gold and something that might have been the light of distant stars. She was strange. She was different. She was nothing like any woman he had ever seen. And she was the most beautiful thing in the universe. Beautiful, Danny whispered. The word escaped his lips before he could stop it, soft and honest and completely genuine. The chamber went absolutely silent. The seemed frozen in shock. Even took a step back, his posture suddenly tense. The princess stared at Danny with an expression he could not read. Her strange eyes widened slightly, and something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or confusion, or something else entirely. Among the, Danny would later learn, beauty was considered a flaw. Their culture valued perfection, uniformity, strength. To be different was to be defective. To be beautiful was to be weak. No one had ever called a member of the royal family beautiful. It was an insult of the highest order. But Danny did not know any of this. He only knew what he felt, what he saw. He only knew that this creature standing before him, with her silver skin and starlight eyes, was the most wonderful thing he had ever witnessed. The princess walked toward him slowly, her movements graceful and fluid. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her eyes. "You think I am beautiful?" she asked. Her voice was soft and musical, like water flowing over smooth stones. Danny nodded. Yes, I do. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Then, slowly, a small smile curved her lips. It was the first genuine expression he had seen from any. "My name is," she said quietly so only he could hear, "and I think we need to talk." Behind them, watched with cold fury building in his hidden eyes. This human had done something unforgivable. He had looked at a princess of the empire and seen beauty instead of weakness. He had looked at her and seen hope. And that made him the most dangerous human in the galaxy. 3 days had passed since Danny first stepped onto the ship. He had expected to be killed, or at least sent back to Meridian 7 with impossible demands. Instead, something strange had happened. The negotiations had stalled. Claimed he needed time to consult with his superiors back on the. Danny was given a small room on the ship and told to wait. It was not a prison cell, but it was not far from one either. The door was locked, the windows showed only the endless black of space, and guards stood outside at all times. But every night, when the ship grew quiet and the lights dimmed to simulate darkness, something wonderful happened. Came to visit him. She arrived through a hidden passage that only members of the royal family knew about. The first time she appeared, Danny nearly fell out of his bed in shock, but she pressed a finger to her lips and smiled that small, secret smile, and somehow he understood that this was not a trick. This was real. They sat together in the darkness, speaking in whispers. Danny told her about Earth, about the world he had never actually seen but loved with all his heart. He described the oceans, vast and blue and full of life. He told her about forests where trees grew so tall they touched the clouds, and deserts where the sand went on forever beneath a burning sun. Listened with eyes full of wonder. "Your world sounds like a dream," she said. "So many colors, so much life." "What's your world like?" Danny asked. Her expression grew sad. Cold, perfect, empty. She looked down at her hands, silver and smooth in the dim light. "There was beautiful once, thousands of years ago, but we changed it. We removed everything that was not useful. We killed the plants, the animals, anything that could not serve the empire. Now it is just metal and stone and silence." Danny felt his heart ache for her. "That sounds lonely." "It is," looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw pain that had been hidden for a very long time. "My people have forgotten how to feel. Emotion is forbidden in our culture. We are taught from birth to suppress everything: joy, sadness, anger, love. They say these things make us weak. They say the empire became great because we removed these flaws from ourselves." "But you're different," Danny said. It was not a question. Nodded slowly. "I was born wrong, according to my people. My light is too bright." She held up her hand, and Danny saw that her skin glowed softly like moonlight trapped beneath the surface. "My features are too soft. My mind wanders too much. While my sisters trained for war, I would sneak away to study the stars. I wanted to know what was out there. I wanted to know if there was more to existence than conquest and control." She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I found records of other species, ones my people had encountered over the centuries. Most of them had been destroyed or enslaved, but some of them left behind traces, art, music, stories. I collected everything I could find. I studied them in secret, hiding them from my family." "And what did you learn?" Danny asked softly. His eyes filled with something bright and fierce. "I learned that emotion is not weakness. I learned that the species who felt the most, who loved and dreamed and hoped, they were the ones who created the most beautiful things. They built monuments that lasted for ages. They wrote songs that could make you cry just from hearing them. They told stories that carried wisdom from one generation to the next." She leaned closer to Danny, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "And I learned about humans. Your species fascinated me more than any other. You feel everything so deeply. You love so hard that it breaks you, and then you love again anyway. You face death with courage and embrace life with joy. You are everything my people have tried to destroy within themselves." Danny did not know what to say. He had never thought about humanity this way. To him, humans were just Humans. Messy and complicated and often disappointing. But hearing describe them, seeing the admiration in her alien eyes, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe they were special after all. I begged my father to let me come on this mission, continued. I told him I wanted to study the humans to find weaknesses we could exploit. But the truth is, I wanted to meet you. I wanted to see if you were really as wonderful as I imagined. She reached out and touched his hand gently. Her skin was cool and smooth, and Danny felt a shiver run through him that had nothing to do with temperature. "And are we," he asked, "are we as wonderful as you imagined?" Smiled, and this time it was a real smile, full and bright and beautiful. "You are more, so much more." They talked for hours that night, and every night after. Danny told her about poetry, trying to explain how words could be arranged to capture feelings that seemed impossible to express. He described music, the way different sounds could combine to create something that moved the soul. He talked about love, about the way humans gave their hearts to each other knowing that someday those hearts might be broken. Drank in every word like water in a desert, and in return, she shared her own secrets. She told him about the Empire's greatest weakness, something that no outsider knew. Her people were dying, not from war or disease, but from emptiness. Without emotion, without purpose beyond conquest, had stopped having children. They had stopped creating anything new. They simply existed, moving from one victory to the next, but never feeling satisfied. "We have conquered 200 star systems," said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "But we have not built anything beautiful in 10,000 years. We have not written a poem or composed a song or painted a picture. We take and take and take, but we never give. And now we are hollow inside." Danny understood then that this was not just about saving humanity. This was about saving the two. They were not evil, not really. They were lost. They had cut away everything that made life worth living, and now they were slowly fading into nothing. "What if there was another way?" Danny asked. "What if your people could learn to feel again?" Looked at him with hope and fear mixing in her starlight eyes. They would resist. They would fight. Everything they believe tells them that emotion is the enemy. Danny took her hand and held it gently. "Then we'll have to show them they're wrong. We'll have to show them what they've been missing." It was a crazy plan. It was probably impossible. But as Danny looked into his eyes, he saw something that made him believe they could actually do it. He saw hope. And hope, he was beginning to understand, was the most powerful force in the universe. Danny had been working in secret for 5 days. Every moment that was not with him, he spent at the small communication terminal in his room. It was supposed to be locked down, limited to only basic functions. But Danny had grown up fixing old computers in his uncle's repair shop back in Kansas, and some skills never fade. He hacked into the system on his second day. It was not easy, and he nearly got caught twice, but he managed to create a hidden channel back to Meridian 7. Through this channel, he sent messages to Commander. He told her his plan. At first, she thought he was crazy. Then she thought he was desperate. Finally, she agreed to help. The plan was simple. The execution would be nearly impossible. Danny wanted to broadcast directly into the ship. Not weapons, not threats, something much more dangerous. He wanted to send them every piece of human art, music, and literature he could gather. He wanted to flood their senses with beauty, with emotion, with everything they had spent thousands of years trying to suppress. "It's a long shot," Commander had said in her last message. "But I suppose long shots are all we have left. Good luck, Danny, and if this doesn't work, well, it's been an honor." Danny smiled when he read those words. He did not know if the plan would work either, but he knew he had to try. On the morning of the 6th day, everything fell apart. Danny was eating a small breakfast when the door to his room burst open. Lord stood there, flanked by 4 guards. His armor seemed darker than before, and even though Danny could not see his face, he could feel the rage pouring off him like heat from a fire. Human, said, his voice sharp as a blade, you have betrayed our hospitality. Danny's heart sank. They knew. Somehow they knew about his messages. He stood up slowly, trying to stay calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Stepped forward and grabbed Danny by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. Danny choked, his feet dangling in the air, his hands clawing uselessly at the armored fingers. You have been meeting with the princess, growled. You have been filling her head with your human poison. Did you think we would not find out? Did you think our security was so weak? He threw Danny against the wall. Danny hit hard and slid to the floor, gasping for breath. His vision swam with black spots, and his chest felt like it was on fire. And that is not all, continued. You have been sending messages to your outpost, making plans, plotting against us. He kicked Danny in the ribs, and Danny cried out in pain. You will be executed for this. Your death will be slow and terrible, a warning to any who dare defy the Empire. Through the haze of pain, Danny managed to speak. What about? Paused. The princess will be returned to thee in disgrace. She will face judgment for her weakness. Her light will be dimmed until there is nothing left of her defective nature. His voice held no emotion, no mercy. She should have been eliminated at birth. I told the Emperor this years ago. Now he will finally listen. Something cold and fierce rose up inside Danny. Not fear, not anymore. Anger. Pure, burning anger at the thought of being hurt, being destroyed, having everything beautiful about her stripped away. You're wrong, Danny said. He pushed himself up onto his knees, then slowly, painfully onto his feet. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, but he did not care. You're wrong about everything. Tilted his head. You still have fight in you, impressive, foolish but impressive. Your people think emotion is weakness, Danny said, his voice growing stronger with every word. You think feeling things makes you lesser, but you're wrong. Fear, love, hope, these are what drive us to do impossible things. These are what make us strong. He looked directly at, meeting the blank helmet with steady eyes. You've conquered 200 star systems, and what do you have to show for it? Empty worlds, hollow victories, a dying empire that can't even remember why it started fighting in the first place. Raised his hand to strike, but Danny did not flinch. But we, Danny continued, we have everything. We have art that makes people weep. We have music that makes them dance. We have stories that live forever, passed from parent to child across generations. We love and we lose and we get back up and we try again. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's humanity. And then Danny smiled, because he had been watching the clock in the corner of his vision, counting down the seconds, waiting for exactly the right moment. The moment was now. Commander, Danny said loudly, knowing his hidden channel was still open, do it. The ship's lights flickered. The walls hummed with sudden energy. And then from every speaker, every screen, every communication device on the vessel, humanity came pouring in. Music filled the corridors. Ninth Symphony crashed through the ship like a tidal wave. The Ode to Joy rang out, thousands of human voices singing together in perfect harmony. Then came jazz, blues, rock, pop, every genre Danny had been able to gather, one flowing into the next in an endless stream of sound. Images appeared on every surface. Paintings from every era of human history, the Mona Lisa, Starry Night, works of color and light and shadow that captured moments of beauty frozen in time. Photographs of sunsets and mountains and oceans. Videos of children laughing, of couples dancing, of old men crying at weddings. And words, poems by Shakespeare and Frost, and stories of love and loss and triumph. Speeches about freedom and hope and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. The stopped moving. Throughout the ship, soldiers who had not felt anything in centuries stood frozen as sensation washed over them. Some fell to their knees. Some removed their helmets and stared at the screens with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Some began to weep, tears streaming down faces that had never known them before. staggered backward, his hands pressing against his helmet as if trying to block out the sound. "What have you done?" he screamed. "What is this?" But Danny was not listening to him anymore. He was looking at the doorway where had appeared. She stood there with tears running down her silver cheeks, her eyes reflecting the images that danced across the walls. "What have you done?" she whispered, but her voice held no anger, only wonder, only awe. Danny walked toward her, stepping past the frozen guards, past the screaming until he stood right in front of her. He took her hands in his. "I gave them a choice," he said softly. "I showed them what they've been missing. Now they have to decide what to do with it." Outside the window, the stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they began to feel. The ship drifted in silence for 3 days after the broadcast. No weapons were fired. No demands were made. The great crystal vessel simply hung in space like a wounded animal trying to remember how to breathe. Danny spent those days with watching and waiting. The guards who had once stood outside his door had wandered away, lost in their own confusion. The rigid order that had defined life for thousands of years had crumbled in the span of a few hours, and no one knew what would rise from the ashes. On the morning of the 4th day, Lord requested a meeting. Danny found him in the command chamber, the same room where they had first met. But everything was different now. The other were gone and sat alone on the central platform, his helmet removed for the first time. His face was not what Danny had expected. He had imagined something cold and cruel, sharp edges and harsh lines. Instead, he saw exhaustion. Deep lines marked gray skin, and his eyes, pale blue like frozen water, held a weariness that seemed to span centuries. "I have spoken with the Emperor," said. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of its arrogance. "I told him what happened here. I told him about the broadcast, about the effect it had on my soldiers, about the effect it had on me." Danny stood before him at his side. What did he say? Was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 10,000 years. He wept. The Emperor of the Empire, ruler of 200 star systems, conqueror of countless worlds. He wept. He looked up at Danny with something new in his eyes. Not hatred, not contempt, something closer to respect, mixed with a fear that he did not fully understand. "The Emperor has ordered me to withdraw our forces from human territory. There will be no conquest, no surrender." Paused, as if the next words were difficult to speak. Instead, he requests a diplomatic exchange, not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals. He wants to learn from you. Danny felt a weight lift from his chest. It had worked. Against all odds, against every expectation, it had actually worked. "The Emperor has one more request," continued. He turned his gaze to, and something softened in his expression. "He asks that Princess serve as our ambassador to humanity. He believes she is the only one who can bridge the gap between our peoples." His hand found Danny's and squeezed tight. "And what do you believe, Lord?" Was silent for a long time. Then slowly, he stood and walked toward them. He stopped in front of and looked at her with eyes that had seen her as defective for her entire life. "I believe I was wrong," he said quietly. "I believe we were all wrong. I have spent my life believing that emotion was the enemy, that feeling things made us weak. But in 3 days, I have felt more than I have felt in centuries. I have listened to your human music and seen your human art, and I have understood things that all my victories never taught me." He placed a hand over his chest where a human would have a heart. "There is something here. I do not know what to call it, but it is not weakness. It is something else entirely." Danny stepped forward and held out his hand, stared at it for a moment, confused. "It's called a handshake," Danny explained. "Humans do it to show respect, to seal a promise, to say that even if we were enemies before, we can be something different now." Slowly, carefully, took Danny's hand. His grip was strong but gentle, as if he was afraid of breaking something fragile. "Something different," he repeated, Yes, I would like that. The months that followed changed everything. Traveled to Earth as the first ambassador in history. Danny went with her, serving as her guide to a world he had only known through stories and pictures. When their shuttle descended through the clouds and he saw the blue oceans and green continents spread out below, he wept. He had waited his whole life to see this sight, and it was more beautiful than he had ever imagined. They walked through cities where humans and began to mingle, awkward at first but growing more comfortable over time. Soldiers who had conquered worlds now stood in museums, staring at paintings with tears streaming down their faces. Artists who had been silent for generations began to create again, their work strange and new but unmistakably alive. On these, something remarkable was happening. The broadcast had been shared across the empire, and everywhere they went, walls began to crumble. Who had suppressed their emotions for their entire lives started to feel again. Some found it terrifying. Some found it wonderful. Most found it both. Children were born who were allowed to laugh and cry and dream. Schools were opened where young learned not just tactics and strategy, but poetry and music and art. The empire did not fall, but it transformed, slowly and painfully and beautifully, into something new. A year after the first contact, Danny and stood together on a balcony overlooking a city on the buildings were still made of crystal and metal, but now there were gardens growing between them. Flowers that had not existed on this planet were beginning to bloom again. Twin suns hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and deep purple. It was sunset, or what passed for sunset on this strange world, and it was breathtaking. "Do your people have a word for this feeling?" asked softly, leaning against Danny's shoulder. He thought about it, the warmth in his chest, the certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, the knowledge that the future was uncertain but full of possibility. "Yeah," he said, "we call it hope." Smiled and slipped her hand into his. Her silver skin glowed softly in the fading light, and her eyes reflected the colors of the sunset like twin universes full of stars. "Hope," she repeated, testing the word. "I like that, it feels true." Danny pulled her close and kissed her forehead gently. "That's because it is. Hope is always true, even when everything else is falling apart, especially then." They stood together in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Behind them they could hear music playing, a melody mixed with human rhythms, creating something that had never existed before. Something new, something beautiful. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts and setbacks and moments of despair. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. There was understanding. There was love. And there was hope. Because that was humanity's greatest gift to the universe. Not weapons or technology or conquest, but the simple, powerful belief that tomorrow could be better than today. That even the coldest heart could learn to feel. That even the darkest night could give way to dawn. Danny looked at her strange and wonderful face, at the love shining in her alien eyes. "Beautiful," he whispered, just like he had the first time he saw her. She smiled, "So are you." And somewhere in the distance, the stars began to shine.